Well, Madam Speaker, it turns out the budgets don't balance themselves. After 9 years of this Prime Minister and the NDP Liberal government, they are 0 for 9 and even coming close to balancing the books here in Ottawa. Not only have they not balanced the budget at all, they have doubled our national debt to $1.3 trillion and counting. $40 billion alone being added in deficit to our national debt this year alone, just in the one fiscal year. They have, and you look at all the charts in the budget, a great big, couple inches thick budget document. You go back and look at the charts to see if they'll ever plan to balance the budget, and the answer is no. There's no date, there is no year, and no circumstance that the Liberals and NDP have proposed to balance the budget. And the worst part is there are tons of broken promises that they've made they have yet to fulfill that would only spend more and drive our deficit up in this country even further. This is important when we talk about the budget, Madam Speaker, because balanced budgets have been part of the common sense Canadian consensus in this country for generations. Nearly the entire history of our country, there's been an idea that deficits were always the exception, not the norm. They were timely, targeted, and temporary was always the line if any government, Liberal or Conservative, for years, for the most part, went through. Instead, we have permanent and painful deficits hurting our country year after year after year with no end in sight. It's important, Madam Speaker, as well, because I always said back in the day when I was a mayor in rural Eastern Ontario, the same principle and expression here belongs the same. It's easy to tell people on what you're going to spend money on. The hard part is how you're going to pay for it. And what we've seen here is never-ending deficits, the budget's not balancing, in endless tax hikes, whether it be the carbon tax being the main point, the excise tax, and numerous other examples of Liberals and NDP being more than happy to add to the tax burden, particularly at a time now when Canadians can least afford it. And after 9 years, they still use the same tired lines when it comes to their budgets. They say the wealthy will pay, the rich will pay, and all these new things. Well, after 9 years, they're still not paying. It is the average Canadian. It is moderate to low-income families that are struggling to get by, that are seeing the carbon tax being added to them, seeing the excise tax, for example, and seeing their paychecks and the value of those paychecks becoming less and less powerful the longer and longer this Prime Minister's here. Deficits matter as well, Madam Speaker, because they require money printing. Bank of Canada, $500 billion. The Prime Minister, in his 9 years, has doubled our national debt, more than every other Prime Minister combined in our country's history. And they're still not even close, $40 billion off from getting to a balance. There's now more money printed chasing fewer goods, and that has resulted in record inflation over the course, but not seen in at least 40 years. The Prime Minister said, but don't worry, interest rates are low, so it's not a big deal. Well, again, all that extra money printing has resulted in inflation, and Canadian households have been hurt very badly by this. Skyrocketing mortgage and rent because interest rates have been driven up from this out-of-control inflationary spending. Food prices are increasing continually at levels that are unsustainable. And now for the average Canadian in this country, at a time when the benchmark is that people shouldn't spend more than 30% of their household income on shelter, it is over double that. Over 60% of Canadian household income now is going just to put a roof over their head before they buy food, they put gas in their car, or do anything else just to make ends meet. And not only has all this inflationary spending and the interest rates and mortgage rates that have increased hurt Canadian households, they've done a bad number on the finances here by the federal government as well. Your interest and mortgage rates have all gone up, and the financing of all this massive new debt, Prime Minister, not a big deal. We're going to borrow all this money, but interest rates are low. Well, since they've gone up, as all this borrowed money and refinancing renews, we are seeing an astronomical increase just to pay the interest on the debt servicing costs alone. Madam Speaker, $54 billion is what we spend, not to pay down the national debt in any way, just to pay the interest on the $1.2, $1.3 trillion national debt we have. We spend more now on those interest payments than we do on health care transfers at a time we're giving money to bankers and bondholders as opposed to more money to doctors and nurses, hospitals, and long-term care. The solution is simple and it is common sense. A dollar for dollar rule. Conservatives have said for every new dollar of spending in a Conservative government, we would find a dollar of savings. And that's not some wild, radical idea. Look no further down to the U.S. It was Bill Clinton, a Democrat, as President of the United States, and Newt Gingrich, as Speaker of the House, that negotiated that deal. And as a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, that same dollar for dollar rule, that was the last time the budget in the United States was balanced. It shows, A, it can be done here, and B, more important than anything, we have to get our finances under control. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, the more he spends, the worse it gets. The more he spends, the higher our debt, our deficits, our interest payments, and the burden not only today, but on future generations. I want to talk about the carbon tax, because the carbon tax is the #1 issue I hear in my travels throughout SDNG and Cornwall. And in this budget, the Liberals and NDP keep their plan to be completely out of touch, extreme when it comes to their approach on the carbon tax. Not only are they happy with where it is at right now, which is about 18 cents a litre on the price of gas and 21 cents a litre on the price of diesel, they want to quadruple it in the coming years as part of their plan. And here is the quick summary of how exactly they're going to do that. They never come out front and tell Canadians just the way it's going to be and that it's going to be 61 cents. You've got to piece it together as they try to do the shell game and hide all of it. There is carbon tax #1, where again, Madam Speaker, we all know farmers on their natural gas and propane pay $1 billion, are going to be paying $1 billion in the coming years just on that, no rebates. Trucking companies to ship foods and goods and services get no rebate, and small businesses get no rebate, and there is no confidence whatsoever. They've been talking for years of offering rebates, and they will continue. There's no detail and no plan to actually do that. And at the end of the day, these rebates are phony, Madam Speaker, because the Parliamentary Budget Officer says just on that first carbon tax, 8 out of 10 families are going to be paying more, or are paying more in the carbon tax. For an example, an Ontario family is going to be out hundreds and hundreds of dollars, 478 by the time you look at everything, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. That's the first carbon tax. The second carbon tax is a fuel standard that the Parliamentary Budget Officer says is going to add 17 cents a litre in the coming years. Zero rebates for anyone, anywhere on that. And if it's not out of touch enough to have carbon tax 1 at 37 cents, carbon tax 2 at 17 cents coming in, Madam Speaker, how out of touch and tax hungry and tax increase obsessed the Liberals and NDP are. They're going to tax the tax. They're going to put the HST and continue to put that on all these other carbon tax increases to get to 61 cents a litre. And the worst part is, I got a letter, Madam Speaker, recently from the Army Navy Air Force Club in Cornwall. You know who also doesn't get a rebate? Community halls and community centres. They sent me their natural gas bill from 1 month in this winter alone. The carbon tax and the HST on it is $275 alone of a $1,100 bill just to service that. Madam Speaker, that is halls, that is community centres, that is legions that are paying a carbon tax with zero rebate, further driving up their cost to try to make just a simple not-for-profit cause in our community. Madam Speaker, the NDP I want to address, as we always do here in the budget. If there's only something they can do about it, you hear them in question period, you hear them in the budget debate complain about all the terrible things the Liberals aren't doing. They promise this in the budget and then they never deliver, and they talk tough. The leader of the NDP did a speech a couple weeks ago that said he wasn't in favor of the carbon tax anymore. Then he flip-flopped and said that he was again. So he flip-flopped on his flip-flop, if you're keeping track. And Talking tough in question period, when the vote was called here, the first one on the budget, only within the last week, once again, the NDP propped up the Liberals, no questions asked, the way that it is. It is time to call a carbon tax election so Canadians can have their say on the future of this country. I have zero confidence after 9 years in this Prime Minister to manage our country.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for St. John, Rotse.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to Member Opposite for his passionate speech. And Madam Speaker, I had to rush to actually put my tie on so I could ask that member this question about the unbelievable fiscal management the party opposite, the Conservatives, think that they have. And he talked about 9 years a few times, with 9 years this and 9 years that. Well, the party that was in power before us for 9 straight years ran a deficit. That is a fact. They ran a deficit. And yes, they balanced the budget in the 10th year because they put in some GM stocks and EI rainy day fund in the pot to balance the budget. But they ran a deficit for 9 straight years. That is fact. So I asked the member opposite, how can you justify saying that we are so bad running deficits through COVID and other things when the party before us, or the party that was in power before us, ran 9 straight years? Thank you.
Honourable Member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
After 9 years, it does matter. He passively mentions they've only been in office for the last 9 years, as if suddenly now there's something they can do about fixing the mess our country's in. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, they're the ones that caused the mess in the first place. That casual little 9 years he talked about, they've doubled our national debt. They've doubled housing prices. They've sent millions of more Canadians to food banks each and every year. And again, taking more people's paychecks and stretching it out. Inflation's been at a 40-year high. Everything they've touched in that 9 years has been a disaster. They try to forget about their record, but trust me, we're going to hold it. Conservatives did balance the budget. We had a plan to balance the budget, and that's been the common sense Canadian consensus for years. We're going to keep doing the same to bring down inflation, control spending, and stop the out-of-touch and just reckless financial approach they've had for far too long.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My Conservative colleague indeed is correct. We are going to support that budget, but it is in the context of the fact that we forced the Liberals to live up to some long fought for policy positions like a national school food nutrition program, like funding for dental care, like funding for pharmacare. We've accomplished a lot of things in this Parliament, including anti-scab legislation. So I'm prepared to go on that record, Madam Speaker. What have the Conservatives done in this Parliament except rage farming, sowing division, complaining all the time? They've got zero to talk about when they go to the next election. So I'm well prepared to hold up our record as the fourth party in this place compared to the official opposition.
The Honourable Member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
A perfect example of the NDP talking a big, tough game. Can't wait for the next election. Stop propping the Liberals up and call the election. Let Canadians decide then about the direction of this country. But no, they're going to prop them up because they know, the NDP and that member from Vancouver Island, the idea of quadrupling the carbon tax in the coming years, the chaos and the drugs and the disorder from their failed legalization of hard drugs in public spaces has been an abject failure. The NDP talks so tough at all the things they deliver, and then in their budget speeches they complain about the Liberals never following through. Let's just dissolve Parliament, have a carbon tax election, and let's see if that member will even come back himself.